Star Wars is beloved the world over, and for good reason. It has one of the most passionate fan bases out there, which can be both a good and bad thing. Some Star Wars fans love the series so much that they actively ignore some of the more glaring inconsistencies and plot holes. We're here to shed some light on some of the Star Wars universe's stranger traits. Have you got a bad feeling about this? Don't worry. None of this changes the fact that we still love Star Wars, and we know you do too. This is where the fun begins. One of the creepier inconsistencies of the Star Wars saga is Luke's relationship with his sister Leia. In A New Hope, a potential romance is suggested between the two characters, but in a misguided attempt to one-up the Empire Strikes Back's twist that Darth Vader was Luke's father, Lucas decided to throw a new twist into the mix. Turns out that Luke and Leia were related the whole time. In a day and age that gives us the whole Jaime-Cersei relationship in Game of Thrones, this doesn't feel as icky. But on second thought, yeah, it does. What is it with the Empire and giant planet-obliterating space spheres? It's bad enough that they used the Death Star twice in the original Star Wars trilogy, but did they really need to recycle it for The Force Awakens too? And no matter how many times the bad guys build this ultimate weapon, they can't seem to devote the time to making its core reactor a little more difficult to access. It's the most powerful and destructive force in the galaxy, and also one of the easiest things to blow up. Another glaring plot hole is this moment from A New Hope. At the start of the film, Vader and his motley crew invade Princess Leia's rebel ship in search of the infamous Death Star plans. You'd think security would be super suspicious of an escape pod on a direct course for Tatooine, but they just let it slip by. Why? Because there are no life forms aboard? This is a universe filled with humanoid robots. Is it that difficult to believe a couple managed to get a hold of the Death Star plans and escape? So in Return of the Jedi, Emperor Palpatine concocts this brilliant plan to allow the Rebel Alliance to steal the plans for the new Death Star. You can't see it, but we're putting air quotes around the word brilliant. What exactly was the motivation for this, and why would the Emperor consider it a good idea? What possible advantage does this give him? He didn't even try to make up fake plans to throw the rebels off the Death Star's true weakness. Come on, Palpatine, get your act together for the next match. Or, well, maybe not. So remember how awesome it was when Obi-Wan Kenobi took on Darth Maul at the end of the Phantom Menace? Not only did he end up besting the spiky-headed Sith Master, he chopped the dude in half. George Lucas stated in a number of interviews that the reason he had this happen was to reinforce to fans that Darth Maul wouldn't be returning in future entries. Only he does return, multiple times. And most recently in Solo: A Star Wars Story. And how does this make sense in any way? We'll have to get back to you on that. When Han Solo is introduced in A New Hope, he makes it clear he doesn't buy into this whole silly Force business. The way he behaves, you'd think the Force was some elusive religion that shows no proof of its existence. Only it is very clearly a real thing. The Jedi Order was even tied into the Republic's day-to-day business back in the day. Plus, if the implication of Solo: A Star Wars Story's ending is that Han might run into Darth Maul in his early days, how would he not believe the Force was a real thing? In A New Hope, Leia gets captured and she and Darth Vader have numerous one-on-one interactions. Despite this, there's never a point where Vader's supposedly all-powerful Force abilities detect that this young lady is his daughter. I guess this makes sense if you look at it from the perspective of, you know what? This doesn't make sense at all. He picks up on Luke's Force abilities from a completely different spaceship, yet he can't detect Leia's when they're in the same room. So much for being the chosen one. And then there's all this nonsense about Midi-Chlorians. As established in the original trilogy, the Force is a mystical, magical energy. But since Georgie Boy seemed set on baffling fans the world over with his prequel trilogy, why not introduce the idea that there was a scientific method to the madness? Somehow, this manifests into an actual human being that Shmi Skywalker gives birth to. She acts so chill about it, like this is something that happens every day. It's even more ridiculous because outside of the Phantom Menace, Midi-Chlorians are never really mentioned again. Ah yes, parsecs. Another infamous, never-ending debate in the Star Wars fandom. What exactly is a parsec? Is it a measure of distance? A measure of time? Something in between? The galaxy may never know. While it now seems firmly established that a parsec is referring to distance, it's still used in many confusing contexts in the Star Wars films. In A New Hope, Han Solo refers to the Millennium Falcon as the ship that made the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs, and fans bent over backwards to force this statement to make sense. After Anakin Skywalker turned to the dark side and became Darth Vader, Obi-Wan took it on himself to put Luke and Leia into hiding. While Leia's situation with Bail Organa made sense, Obi-Wan made the odd choice of leaving Luke in the care of Owen Lars and his wife Beru on Tatooine, basically Vader's childhood home. Did it never even occur to Obi-Wan that Vader might someday return to Tatooine to check things out? They don't even change Luke's last name. They got lucky, sure, but it still doesn't seem like a smart move. In The Empire Strikes Back, Han Solo made the fatal mistake of bringing Leia and the rest of the group to Cloud City. In an effort to prevent their potential escape, Vader had Lando's people disable the Millennium Falcon's hyperdrive system. Except if Vader had really been interested in preventing their escape, why wouldn't he just disable the whole ship? Maybe Vader is just a big fan of the hunt and chasing down his enemies. Or maybe this is a massive oversight on the part of the film's creative team. In The Return of the Jedi, Luke and Leia have an intimate conversation where Luke ends up revealing the two of them are related. When Luke asks Leia to tell them about their mother, Leia recalls with vivid detail what Padme was like. Later, Revenge of the Sith reveals that Padme died in childbirth, spending next to no time with her children. Maybe it's just the Force conjuring up these images in Leia's mind, but Luke spent just as much time with Padme, so why wouldn't he have any recollection of her? Growing up on Jakku, it's no wonder why Rey became versatile and skilled in a number of trades. She's a solid fighter, speaks multiple languages, and a decent pilot to boot. Despite being capable, her skill set leaves little room for challenge. After a few minutes, she's able to pick up the Millennium Falcon's controls without much difficulty. After a few minutes with a lightsaber, she's able to take on Kylo Ren and even Supreme Leader Snoke's personal guard. Sure, she's adept in the way of the Force, but everything's just a tad bit too easy for her. Did you ever notice that in A New Hope, no one seems to really care all that much about the horrible deaths and carnage going on around them? When Luke's Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru met their untimely and brutal demise, Luke just stands there looking on stoically. After the destruction of her home planet, Leia seems a little bummed, but that seems a major underreaction to such a monumental tragedy. Even Obi-Wan's death is met with a brief 15 seconds of sadness before everyone's off blowing up TIE fighters and cheering each other on. And speaking of Leia's muted reaction to Alderaan's destruction, how about that put-on British accent she inexplicably adopts during her conversations with Grand Moff Tarkin?
I recognized your foul stench when I was brought on board.
Maybe this is just how she's been raised to speak with Imperial officials, or maybe she's just trying to match his regal stature and elegance. Whatever the case, it's an extremely odd affectation, and it never pops up again in any of the movies. Halle Berry clearly took some inspiration from Star Wars when it came to her own awkward accent as Storm, which completely disappeared by the time X-Men 2 rolled around. After demonstrating incredible heroics blowing up the Death Star and defeating the Empire, Luke and Han are awarded with special medals. Our favorite Wookiee Chewbacca, however, is left out in the cold. Why though? He played just as much of a role in rescuing the princess and destroying the Death Star as Han or Luke. He's even delegated to a lower step than those two. What's the deal, Leia? Just because he's a big walking carpet, it doesn't mean he doesn't have feelings too. So much of what happens in the Star Wars saga centers around Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala. Their love story is supposed to be one for the ages, culminating with their offspring Luke and Leia and Anakin's ultimate redemption. Only at its very core, this particular romance makes no sense. During their time together, Anakin behaves like a petulant child. Oh, and he murders people on the side. The bulk of their love story consists of Anakin telling her she's pretty in between bouts of bad behavior. So why exactly is Padme so attracted to him? Most fans don't exactly ignore Jar Jar Binks. In fact, many go out of their way to use Jar Jar as an unfortunate punching bag and a reminder of why the prequel trilogy didn't resonate as strongly as the original trilogy. Despite his general ineptitude and accident-prone behavior, Jar Jar somehow ends up as a senator. Perhaps the most unbelievable thing of all is that he manages to hold on to the position for the remainder of the prequel trilogy and plays a part in a number of major decisions that are made. In The Force Awakens opening crawl, we learn that Luke Skywalker had gone missing. He spends the entire film on the sidelines until the film's conclusion, where Rey is sent on a mission to find him. Except Rey has never met Luke in person. Not only that, Leia and the rest of the Resistance have only just met her. So why are they entrusting her with a task such as this? Wouldn't it make more sense for Leia to go and appeal to her brother? Somebody answer me, please! You can do so in the comments below. Another thing no one seems to pay much attention to is the Phantom Menace as a whole. This entry is entirely pointless in the grand scheme of things. Seriously, what do we learn in that movie that is absolutely imperative to us understanding Anakin's character? He's a kid on Tatooine, he loves his mom, he loves pod racing. That's about it. Even the other characters don't do much of significance to the overarching plot. Many fans have taken to removing this one from their marathons as a result. And what about Luke's big convoluted plan to rescue Han Solo in Return of the Jedi? Let's break this down. Luke sends R2-D2 and C-3PO into the Lion's Den, making the assumption that Jabba the Hutt won't tear them apart. He also throws Leia into the mix so she can get captured and be forced to wear a space bikini? And Lando's there in disguise, even though it's likely Jabba and his cronies already know who he is. All of this so Luke can show up and save the day anyway. Cool. And speaking of Return to the Jedi, how about them Ewoks, right? And look, let's be clear. We're not here to beat up on these adorable creatures. We like Ewoks just fine. The harder pill to swallow, however, is that they could play such a major role in taking down the Empire. Over the course of 2 films, Lucas and his team established that the Empire is a force to be reckoned with, despite the Stormtroopers' pitiful aim. Then, suddenly, they're all getting beat up by a bunch of teddy bears. It doesn't add up. Now, let's talk about the merits of the so-called high ground in the Star Wars universe. As we're sure you recall, during the extensive climactic lightsaber battle at the end of Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan insists that the battle is over. He has the higher ground after all. And look, we're not arguing he doesn't have a point. There's a major tactical advantage to having the higher ground. Except when he fought Darth Maul, he didn't have the higher ground and still managed to best his foe. Did Obi-Wan just completely forget about that? The most recent Star Wars film, Solo: A Star Wars Story, introduced a particularly baffling moment to the franchise. Han manages to talk his way out of trouble by speaking the Wookiee language to Chewbacca. Only, we've never seen anyone in the Star Wars universe that isn't already a Wookiee do this, and it's painfully clear why. It's one of the more cringeworthy moments in the franchise, made all the more confusing by the fact that Han never broke into this particular language with Chewie ever again. Then again, maybe that's for the best. And finally, let's take a look at Force ghosts. So let me get this straight. You have to be on the light side of the Force to become a ghost, right? Then how did this work with Anakin? He redeemed himself at the end, sure, but that seems a bit like a cop-out. Things got even more confusing with Lucas's decision to replace the original Anakin actor Sebastian Shaw with Hayden Christensen in the film's closing scene. If Anakin redeemed himself as an old man, why would his younger self show up? No explanation is given. There are plenty more inconsistencies to examine, but we'll stop here. So what do you think, Star Wars fans? Are there any others we should have mentioned? Did we mention ones you have solid explanations for? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.